Yo, Ryan Hart here. Welcome to the Always Better Than Yesterday podcast channel. These are the interview sessions where I put my curious questions to inspiring people with one goal in mind, to help you be better than you were yesterday in your heart and in your mind. While you're here spending time with us, I'd love it if you subscribed, leave a like, or maybe drop a comment below with letting us know some of your thoughts on the interview. Please do share it with someone that you'd love to help be better too. John, welcome to the Always Better Than Yesterday podcast. So good to have you on. How are you?
Ryan, good to have me. I'm doing great. Yeah, thank you.
Amazing. We talk about Always Better Than Yesterday, helping develop heart-centered leaders. I really believe that helping leaders lead with love, that's the secret to leaving people, teams, communities that bit better. And I'd love to dive into this topic of body-centered leadership. But first of all, just tell us a little bit about your work and all the good stuff that you do in the world.
I think like even jumping into body-centered leadership and how I got there and where it's going is relevant. But I think like I want to answer your question, but first just around you said heart-centered leadership, and so when I called what I was the events that I was doing body-centered leadership, some of the programs, it was really heart. I mean, the heart is the central, you could call it a central pattern generator. It actually is the most powerful electromagnetic and electrical field of the body. And when you just energetically and physiologically, when you connect and you have a true experience of the intelligence of and the brain that is in your heart leading, it is not only just a metaphorical thing, but it's a biological shift that happens where your heart actually informs your brain. Matter of fact, about 90% over high 80s to maybe low 90 percentile of the fibers that go between the brain directly and the heart are going from the heart to the brain in the vagus nerve. And communication is really designed to lead from the heart. So, and that is a body-centered thing. So you can't just like metaphorically sort of conceptually get that. You have to experience it through your body. So I think we're on the same page there. I have the energetic, physiological, biological angle that we can talk about. And then also what that means. What does it mean to be living from there? But to now answer your question after my little tangent.
I love that.
I started out I was a fine artist, and I was also an athlete, a surfer, skateboarder, martial artist, and fine artist, going to school for art, sculpting, painting, printmaking, all this kind of figure drawing. And so I took an anatomy course in order to better understand the human body, so that I could paint and draw better. And during that course, I actually took the pre-med anatomy course at the college. So I was dissecting cadavers, and I was in there with all the medical students. And the instructor in the lab was like, "What field of medicine are you going into?" And I said, "I'm an artist." And he was like, "What? What are you kidding? What are you doing with your life?" And so he said, "Have you ever thought about something?" He's like, you're pretty much the best student in the class. What are you, have you looked at anything like chiropractic? Because he was a retired chiropractor. And I said, "No, I've never been to a chiropractor in my life, never had an adjustment, never had a massage, never had acupuncture. I was in my early 20s, like 20 years old. I'd never had a healing experience in my entire life. I was on medications for asthma and allergies and eczema and hives that would break out over my body. I was shot up with injections from the time I was a little kid because I was having all these reactions. They really didn't know how to, they didn't know it was tied into other things, like emotions and unexpressed things that were happening in the household. And so anyway, long story short, I signed up for chiropractic school, never having been to a chiropractor, ended up in chiropractic college, met my wife there. She introduced me to healing, really. Her dad was a medical doctor. Her mom was a nurse. She grew up in New York. I grew up in California. So opposite coasts, very opposite kind of lives. But she had a chiropractor that she was referred to when nothing was working for some stuff that was going on, and she got on this table and he did this like very subtle work. He barely touched her and she felt like she could breathe for the first time in her life. And she was like transformed, and she was like, what is this? I need to do this. So that's how, so she introduced me to more subtle approaches, and she got me actually going to practitioners where I started to have my own healing experiences. And I started, and all of the symptoms that I had, asthma and eczema and allergies and all these things, my whole life just cleared up within about a 6 to 8 month period. It was all reducing, and then with a couple of years later, like everything had cleared. So I had my own experience, and then we started a practice, and we had a practice working with people for 20 plus years. And then in the course of the last about probably 12 years or so, I started working with people in more high performance. I started working with Tony Robbins. I started going around the world and working with different entertainers and entrepreneurs and athletes, et cetera. And so I built a more kind of high performer, high achiever practice. But now I don't even have an office, and I only work, kind of with private clients, and also do events and do some courses, and we're working on some digital stuff. So that's the nutshell. Now I'll shut up and let you ask
No,
questions.
it's all good. I came into the coaching space when in a time where everyone's talking about mindset is everything. Mindset is everything. And I just knew that there was something about the heart, something about passion, purpose, caring. And I was in a Japanese restaurant, and this menu said kokoro bowls, food for the heart, the mind, and the soul. And I was like, that's it. Kokoro, it symbolizes the fact that we have these things that serve their own purpose. The heart, the mind, the body, they all have functions of their own. Is that something that you believe to be true, and that you are able to, when you work with people, separate out the different functions, the different layers, as it might be? You talk about
Yeah.
inside out.
Yeah, I mean there are layers. I mean, if you think about like you might think about it if you have any kind of exposure to physics, even in high school, like what was taught was there's a nucleus of an atom, and then there's electrons that are orbiting around in different shells or different energy states around this electron. A more accurate way to look at it is the electron doesn't actually exist in a specific location. It's more of what we call a superposition, or a potentiality of where it could be. It's a more of a fuzzy cloud of probability. Until someone or something is measured, someone measures it or observes, there isn't really a location for the thingness of it. And that's really what the energy shells in a way of are the body, the subtle body of the human body are like. You can measure the electromagnetic field of the heart outside of the body, several feet or more. But the electromagnetic field of the heart is not the entirety of what the consciousness of the heart is. It's just one aspect that you can measure. You can measure certain, you can see that there's biophoton or light communication happening in the body. There are in the DNA. There in the fascia network of the body. There's a kind of liquid crystal structure to it where energy and information is traveling everywhere at once in this kind of quantum pattern where communication is happening all over the body at once. And one of the ways that it's communicating is via light, photons of energy, also sound, acoustic waves, also biochemically, also through chemical reactions and many different things, and electromagnetic fields. All this stuff is happening, but again, that doesn't really tell you what these layers or these fields of energy that surround the body are. We know that there's some, like in all traditions, there's an etheric or a life force or prana or chi or ki, or there's some terminology for a life force that animates the body. It's not there. This is what I experienced when I was in the lab, in that anatomy lab back, almost 30 years, over 30 years ago. I was dissecting a human body. This was, it was, there's a body. This is a dead person. And it was the first time that I experienced a dead body like that for a prolonged period and there was no life force, there was no animating energy, and it was just like matter, the density of matter with no life. And it was a very stark recognition at that moment of there's something that animates us that is not here. Like it's just a very, very visceral experience of that when you experience cutting into human flesh that is not, there's no consciousness there, there's no animating force. So I know that every part of the body, every system of the body has information and energy that is, there's a consciousness. There are different levels and types or depths of consciousness that exist in the tissues and around the body. And those, you might call that subtle energy, but it's like an energized consciousness or a conscious energy that has information encoded into it, that has awareness encoded, that is shaping and organizing how the physical world works. And that became my obsession, right? Like, what is this, which led me to studying, Ayurvedic, Taoist, indigenous, shamanic, all this stuff, like looking at all, what were the people that were supposedly interacting with these kind of forces talking about. So then it gets you into like thousands of years of teachings and wisdom traditions. And then I'm like, what is the science on this stuff? Like, cause I want to know what is actually real, because at that time I hadn't really had very mystical experiences. I was like, I wanted to like proof. Then it got me into the scientific side, looking at biology and looking at biochemistry and looking at the organic processes that are going on. And so I've kind of woven all that together in my work. And I've realized that, I would say our body is in our consciousness, and our consciousness is in a larger nested field of more higher dimensions of consciousness until we ultimately expand out to where we get to some kind of cosmic consciousness or one consciousness. So the heart is the connection to that. I mean, the whole body is the connection, but the heart is the real, is a huge part of the dynamic connection to that.
The more and more I dive into this, the more my I mean, you've obviously spent your lifetime dedicated to this, but I'm scratching the surface of my knowledge, and I know that so much of it will transcend my understanding, and I'm at peace with that. But what I'm learning is that this sense of the emitting the photons, I understand that happens most when we're in a state of love. And I find that fascinating because you talk about Eastern tradition, you look at the biblical references that God is love, God is light. And I find that fascinating. Here's something written 2,000 years ago, and that science is saying this state helps us emit light. How do you get your head around it? Because what I've seen of your work, there is a bit where you understand the unseen. See, there's an element of faith in the unseen, but then you've taken it to a point where you're able to interact within that space and to influence it. And I just love to know, how did you take that step to not only just believe in the unseen, but be able to do the great things that you do?
Well, what happens with any kind of practice, if you are involved in anything for a long period of time with commitment to it, you develop some kind of mastery. And there's the kind of cultural adage of like 10,000 hours or whatever.
Yeah.
It's more than that, really. But what happens with anyone doing anything is that you get more, your sensory motor capabilities increase, your sensitivity to things increases, your use of force decreases, and your presence with it increases. So like there's this combination of less force, more awareness, and more interaction with like the environment around us that allows things to go more smoothly, and there's a kind of coherent flow that starts to happen. I mean, athletes, I actually I'm starting a clubhouse conversation about this in the coming weeks with Susan Paley, who's the co-founder of Beats headphones. Originally, she has a new company where she's putting sound and vibration into the human body and creating frequency changes and stuff. So we're talking about flow, and we've had neuroscientists in that conversation and sports psychologists in this conversation about flow. But what happens is you get into these states where everything's just effortless. It's the zone of total effortlessness. And so as I was developing over the years, you start to see patterns, and you start to see that a very small input into the right area that's most receptive creates a global change. So I started using less force, and I would find what is the exact vector of force in the exact region of the body that would allow the brain and body to coordinate that input of force and use it to reorganize or shift itself. And that is because the system is it's a dynamic, nonlinear, self-organizing system that's constantly exchanging energy between the environment and the internal. And we're always like, that is what equilibrium is. We're constantly having to like output energy, draw in energy, and find some kind of balance. Not enough energy, you start breaking down. Too much energy, you start breaking down. You have to like balance that out. And so that's like that understanding that that's what we're working with when we're working with the quote unquote body is an energy system that's self-aware, that's organizing itself around what's happening in the environment and internally. Then my work became like intervening in a way with the right force at the right time, the least amount possible, in just the right place that the whole system could like change itself. And that became the fascination, because like once you start doing that, you get out of the way and you go, wow, this is the power of creation of the universe and of the body doing itself. All I'm doing is kind of holding up a lens in a way to focus or magnify something that's already possible. And then I get out of the way. And that's I would say how what I've been able to do can happen so quickly and look so strange, where I could be 4 feet off the body and then the body's responding, because that vector of force becomes a focus, intention, holding the space for a million different things to be happening and knowing what that outcome will be. And then I could just literally touch into the space, not even touching the physical body, and the subtle sensory system is picking up that as a force. Just like if you're driving and you see a flashing lights behind you and you think, oh, I'm going to get pulled over and get a ticket, and all of a sudden your body goes into stress. Did anything touch you? Just some photons of light, so or somebody blows on the back of your neck. They don't touch you, but just behind your ear in a way, and all of a sudden your whole physiology changes and your like plans for the day are totally changed. Like everything changed because of this input of energy. Did anything actually physically touch you? No, but did the physical system respond to that because it's a non-linear dynamic system? Absolutely. So that's where it goes.
So fascinating. And it's interesting your background in chiropractics, and you say about the use of force. Like, my experience of a chiropractor here in the UK is brutal, savage. They're the most sadistic human beings I've ever met, because when those cracks go, they're like, oh, that's it, sadistic. But I find it fascinating, and I'm aware of the double slit experiment, which in effect, for our watchers and our listeners, is the idea that consciousness can change physical reality. So when you're working with people, can your consciousness change others' physical reality, or is that where your sounds and commands would come in and play a part?
Yes, it can. I mean, you think about anybody who would go to travel to some place in the world to be in the presence of some guru, some spiritual guru, by just being in that field, they could have a Kundalini awakening. They could have their body could be shaking, their energy could be flowing. People would travel, to be in the presence of Jesus, of Buddha, of all these, very high spiritual beings. So that field that is held by somebody's consciousness is transformational. And somebody can be just like a magnetic field will move pieces of metal around without touching them. The field has an impact on physical reality. There's Rupert Sheldrake out of the UK is well known for his work on what's called morphogenetic fields. Sheldrake is brilliant and a very you know, he's like a serious scientist, who was actually, you know, very disruptive to the scientific community, because he was questioning many of the theories and many of the theories about how things work. Like, he wrote a book about how dogs know their owners are coming home from, you know, tens of miles away or more, and they would know to go at the exact time, jump off the couch, go to the door when their owner was leaving the office, without any kind of communication. How do we know? How do geese know?
I
You
can
know, how
believe
do
that.
right? So how do, like, what other mechanisms could be happening, and that would influence or inform the way that things are happening in the material world that we can't see? And so morphogenetics, genetic fields of information and energy that inform and shape the physical reality. Like, how does a salamander's limb grow back? You know, that theory is that there's a field of information somehow that is informing those stem cells how to move. So we're getting into this now. Really, we're in the dark ages, crawling around in the and we're starting to now, as people are now starting to. I just spoke with someone the other day. He's the CEO of a company that's growing, you know, organ tissues, and they're starting to shape organs, you know, for transplant, et cetera. And we were talking about fields, and we were talking about, you know, this kind of where things are going energetically, and the consciousness. How does a stem cell know to become whatever cell? Where's that information coming from? The work of people like Bruce Lipton, who was an instructor of mine in chiropractic college before he was well known, on the biology of how does our genetic coding know how to be influenced in certain ways. That's like outside of the cell. It's epigenetics is a big part of it. There's information that's in the field around us. So this is all like exciting territory, and there's a lot of progress being made, but we have a long way to go.
In my limited understanding, I'm aware that if we're in states of survival, we struggle to get to those higher states of being, love, gratitude, and then being able to tap into that higher energy. From a leadership perspective now, we spend so much of our time, the busyness within business is real. And, you know, I think so often the thing that gets in the way of good leadership is this sense of busyness and competition. And you know, you work with thousands of people, and yet there must be some regular patterns that you see emerge from humans. What are some of those core patterns that you would see within leaders?
So one of the core patterns I see among very, you know, successful and very busy leaders is that the creative, innovative kind of downloads that come through when someone's in a truly, you know, innovative state where you're open, you're receptive, you're inspired. That is harder and harder to access for a lot of leaders, because they're filling their time with managing what they've created, whether it's an entrepreneur that actually created a startup or a company that now is like, you know, up to 50 employees, 100 employees, 120 employees, 200 employees, whatever. And now there's just so much fires to put out, urgencies all the time. They're in reaction. So now you're slipping into a baseline state of this kind of fight or flight mode, where in that state you have less blood flow and oxygen going to the centers of the brain that are associated with higher level creativity and thinking. And you have less coherent flow of energy in your system that allows you to be in sync with things and in flow. And so there's this kind of dance of how do you navigate what you've created and still tap into the creative energy and innovative kind of thinking that's necessary to take you to the next level. And you really need to shift out of that reactive state if you want to make progress, because there's a sort of an energy that's bound up in the body when you're in that fight or flight state. That means it's not available for higher functions, for higher cognitive functions, and also for higher consciousness. And so there can tend to be, and I see this as a pattern over and over, you know, amongst high performers. It's not about oftentimes like developing skills further, because a lot of times the skills are there. It's getting into the state into the zone, into the flow, and then navigating how do you stay there more often? How do you access that more often? How do you spend more time in your heart where you're feeling connected, you're feeling grounded, you're feeling centered, you're feeling open, you're feeling empathetic, you're feeling, creative. And that becomes the biggest challenge and also the biggest opportunity. And so like, that's where I kind of come in, because I'm helping people develop the tools and strategies, but I'm also helping them physically make that shift if I'm working one-on-one, but also teaching things if it's digital or whatever.
Yeah, it's just so much application, isn't it? Because we go to work and we're humans, we're human beings in the workplace. So anything that works for us in other areas of life, we should be able to take that with us. And I think the most simplest thing that a leader should never underestimate is the power of breath. Right? Is that the gateway? Is that the starting point for many of these things?
I think breath brings, awareness. Breath oxygenates the body. Breath brings, focus and feeling and sensitivity, and brings more conscious, attention. Every tradition and every kind of shamanic work and every kind of state change work always uses breath techniques. Interesting what I've found. So it's as critically important as breath is. Not everybody um, benefits massively by focusing just on changing the breath, because some people are wired differently, and some people they kind of get short-circuited when they focus too hard or intensely on breathing. Some people need to focus more on movement of their body. They need to focus on feeling the physical stretching and moving or dancing or somehow swaying, getting their body moving. And once they get moving, they start breathing and energy starts flowing. Other people, they need to focus on the energy flow or the visualization of, or the sense or kinesthetic sense of energy. Other people, don't feel energy at all, and that seems very abstract, and they need to focus on the breath or the movement. So there's what I call the optimal flow sequence, which is, in what way do you need to focus and what do you need to put your attention on that opens you up the most? So for me, it's breath. I lead with breath. So I would take a breath, and as I breathe, I sense and feel energy moving, and then I move my body and everything goes into sync together. But other people I've found, they do it the opposite. They move their body, and as soon as they start moving, now they can feel energy flowing, and then they take a breath, and then everything syncs up. So there's a whole process that I've kind of discovered over time that, we're all wired differently, but there are some patterns and trends. So breath is so critical. Breath is so important, and changing the breath patterning changes consciousness. So you can breathe in through your mouth, out through your mouth, which creates this kind of, it could be dissociative or it could be an integrative breath. You can breathe in through your nose, out through your nose, which builds chi, builds energy, and builds like attention and focus. You can breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, which is grounding and brings you more present. And you can bring breath in through your mouth and out through your nose, which takes you into more emptiness and non-self. So those 4 breath patterns will alter consciousness. But again, just leading with breathing and saying, I'm going to just change my breathing and that's going to be the answer is just, it doesn't work for everybody, but it's a huge part.
The 2 words I'm about to say were not on my agenda 2 years ago, and they are faith and surrender. I was not interested in faith, i.e., belief in the unseen, and surrender being, I was a man that I was going to work my face off, control everything. How much does faith and surrender play a part in allowing access to what it is that you help people with?
I mean, I would say the word grace. Grace is what we ultimately, when we really wake up to what's actually going on and recognize the role of grace, whatever you want to call that, source, God, synchronicity, divine grace, divine guidance. But there is absolutely no, true control that we can focus and we can direct, and I believe we have free will,
Mm.
but that free will is in the context of an interconnected universe that's interdependent. And we might think we're choosing something of our own accord or our own free will, but that could be influenced by generations before, and epigenetics and biological changes and cultural fields, morphogenetic fields. All these things can be influencing what and our energy state at the time. And so if we're in a high energy state and we're open, we will get different information and we'll make different choices. So we do have to surrender to something bigger than us. And we do not control the majority of what we think we control. I agree with you.
You said earlier you work with Tony Robbins and many high profile people. What does your self-care look like? You know, working with the energies of people, what does that take out of you, and how do you have to fill back up your own energy?
Everything that I'm doing works well, works better. The more present I am, the more focused I am, the more connected I am to myself and to everything around me. So I really do have to live what I'm doing, and I have to walk the talk for sure. So for me, what I've developed the ability to do over many years, over decades of working with people, is have this kind of paradoxical almost thing going on when I'm working, and that is total commitment to the outcome for the person with total unattachment to my role in it. And that's a very interesting and bit hard to describe, because it is like this paradoxical thing of like, what's going to happen, it's happening, and we're going to get there. How we're going to get there, I don't know exactly. I mean, I know all the different like routes that I've gone before, but we may get into new territory. But it's happening before we're done with this session, or before we're done with whatever it is we're doing. It's going to happen. But it can't be about me in any way, shape, or form. I can't be the savior or the hero or the one that gets the significance from doing it. I actually have to get out of the way. That's the surrender part of it. But then I have to have all of my tools, all of my skills, all of my focus 100% there for that to actually be able to work. So I would say that's where I don't take on things very very seldomly. Like people, they get totally drained, exhausted working with people, leading things. If you're a leader and you're like constantly drained, constantly exhausted, constantly just like feels like the energy got sucked out of you, it's because you have an attachment to either how you're supposed to be, how you want to be perceived, your role that you feel like you should do, the wanting to please others, or you have an overly strong attachment to being right. You have an overly strong attachment to being the one that like figures it out or fixes it. You want the attention and the significance of being that special person, whatever. So all of those things actually bind up energy, because now you're in reaction. You're not truly in a flow. And so a lot of what I'm constantly doing, besides all the right things, like, we know we got to eat well. We know we need to hydrate. We know we need sleep. We know we need exercise. We know we need to meditate. Everybody knows that anyone who's in a leadership position, that you have those things all help. And then the reason why that people slip into these states where you just go on a binge, you just go, someone goes out and smokes a pack of cigarettes and they haven't smoked in like 5 years. They go and eat a whole whatever, they go and go into their sex addiction or pornographic addiction, whatever, like a way to just try to not deal with or feel the intensity of what's going on. Everybody is dealing with this on a human level. So the way that you don't get triggered so much to go off and deviate into these like less than resourceful behaviors is that you deal with what is coming up for you and the attachments that are and the triggers that are happening in the moment as they're happening, and it's bringing a self-awareness to the energetic zing that you get when you have that conversation and you don't like what was said, but you're like, I'm fine. And then you hold that in, and then the body's in fight or flight and you're in reaction. And then you have to do something to discharge that energy. And if you're still not really dealing with it, then you'll go to an addictive behavior or something to try to diminish the feeling of it. So for me, I'm always recognizing, I'm always paying attention, like, where am I getting hooked or triggered, or where am I getting invested or in this? And then I'm like expressing that, or allowing myself to just surrender to it and just let it move through. And if it's not me catching it, then damn sure my wife will. And she'll be like, oh, so, so really, you really believe that, huh? And I'm like, oh, busted again. So you believe your own BS here. So I think that's critical for anyone in a leadership position. It's like, it's really like your use of energy and how efficiently you use energy and how energized you feel is directly correlated with how aware you are of your attachments in these places where you're getting hooked because you have an investment, you have an agenda, and you don't like the way it's going, or you don't like the feeling of it's not going your way, or you got embarrassed, or you got angry and you didn't express it, or whatever it is. And if you start identifying those places, the amount of energy that becomes liberated when you then let that go. And you also sometimes need to make the sound of it. You need to move your body. You need to growl or grunt or moan or sigh or cry. And most people have a difficult time just connecting to that authentic expression, because they're not connected to that it's even happening. And two, if they were connected, they're embarrassed by it, or they're just conditioned to not go there. So then they hold all that energy, and now they become a tuning fork for that same energy when they encounter it next time. Because if you can't accept something or feel it and express it in yourself, then you are going to encounter it and it's going to get pinged in your system because it's not integrated in you. So now you get mirrored it back, and now you'll have an experience of it. But then if you're not accepting it, then you'll blame that other person. And now it becomes like pointing outside of yourself as if that is the problem, rather than you haven't just dealt with you.
That's powerful. I grew up with a single parent. My mum, she used to work 3-4 jobs, the epitome of optimism, hard work ethic. But she'd always have a go-to response that is, "Oh, it'll be fine," or "I'm fine." Like, and I think that was great leadership for her, because she made the best of bad situations. But if we flip that, and when we routinely say "I'm fine," but the body and the heart says otherwise, what are some of the consequences? I guess it's a little bit about what you've just said.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you that, like, there's a need sometimes, like, if there's, with kids, for example, you need to give them some kind of certainty and stability that like, if like, no, nothing's fine, everything's terrible, and you're just this little kid, and you're like, okay, not so. But at the same time, if there is a lot going on, you pick it up in your sensory system and you feel emotionally what's going on. But if it's being kind of swept under the rug, and if it's constantly always fine and nothing is ever expressed or discussed, then you learn to take that energy and that feeling that you have and then just like bury it, because you don't have an outlet for it. And then you get scrambled as a child because you're hearing everything's fine, you're feeling it's not fine, and then routinely you're told that over and over. So you start to learn to distrust your own sensory system and your own feelings. So internally, what starts to happen is there's basically what the research that has been done, and some of it is through a heart math institute for heart math. When they look at somebody's heart and another person's brain, you can measure the brain waves with EEG, you have your EEG and your EKG, so your electrocardiogram, so your heart, and your EEG is your electroencephalogram, the brain. So there's a relationship between those waves, and when they're in sync with each other or entrained with each other, then the body's in a more coherent state and things are in flow. When you are around other people who are in a very stressed state and you're in sync in yourself, their brain and their heart will start to sync up with your rhythm and your system. It
Mm.
doesn't really work as well the other way. So it's a person who's more dissonant or more in a very frenetic state. They won't pull your coherent brain and heart into that state. You'll pull them into yours. So we think about, like earlier we talked about someone going to visit a guru and they're just in their presence and they have this awakening because they get pulled into that more coherent state.
Wow.
So what we can do as leaders, what we can do as parents, et cetera, is we can deal with our shit and then dissipate and move energy and do the work we have to do to get congruent and coherent. And then we just show up, and our children or the people around us, or our teams and our employees, et cetera, will feel that congruence and they'll move in that direction. They'll get pulled in that direction. We'll be a beacon of, or a provider of energy that doesn't drain us and doesn't run out, because it's just a wave of coherent energy that we just give off. That is what healing really is about. I mean, if you think about most of what's happening in the healing interaction is that a more coherent, more aware and present energy is being held, and then the person's body and brain and nervous system starts organizing itself around that. So we can be that for our whatever it is that we're part of, and we can show up like that. And that will, and it's not just a woo-woo thing, it's actually measurable. You can measure somebody else's brain showing up in the other person's, heart and brain waves. You can see that people in train are getting in sync with each other. And so we can draw people into those more calm, more coherent states. And I think that, so what's happening in the body is that when you're super stressed out, you go into a dissonant state. The brain is firing, the heart rate variability, and all these things start shifting. There is it's in a less coherent interaction internally, and that's what happens when we get triggered. Our body goes into these fight or flight states, and so we can pull people into them just with our presence if we're congruent.
I love that. That's so powerful. I have one or two more questions, then I shall be respectful of your time. And I saw on your episode with Gwyneth Paltrow, you were with Julianne Hough, and I was watching recently. My 5-year-old daughter's just done a production of Grease in a little stage acting group, and so we were doing some research, and we were watching Grease the musical a couple of years back, and obviously Julianne plays Sandy in Grease the musical. And we know that Sandy sings this lyric, "To my heart, I must be true." Why is that true for leaders? And what are some of the ways with which leaders can be true to their heart?
Our hearts, they have a brain, they have an entire cardiac nervous system. They have a electromagnetic field and an electrical current that's 60 and 100 times greater than the brains. So they provide a information and a kind of organization pattern for the whole system, not only ours but those around us. So when there's incongruence, when there's grief, when there's anger, when there's lack of expression of what's really being felt, either because we're just unaware of it or because we're not feeling safe to just be who we are, then there becomes like that dissonant or disconnected experience where the heart just kind of takes a back seat. And if we were to truly feel and connect with what is really actually being experienced and allow it to move through us and allow it to be accepted as it is, like someone who just refuses to accept that they're angry or refuses to accept that they're really sad and they're just powering through and trying to control everything and trying to work it, and you actually stop and you finally connect, you can just put your hands on your heart, you can just take a breath, and you can recognize, am I even connected to my heart? Does it feel distant? Does it feel lost? Does it feel separate somehow? And even if you just acknowledge that, right here I feel disconnected, or right here I feel separate, that is at least true. Like the body will not lie. The body, the breath, the energy flow, that doesn't lie. So when you connect to that, you get this truth. And the truth sometimes is, I don't know what I'm feeling here. I put my hands on my heart and I take a breath and it feels distant. And so you just say right here, I feel distant, I feel lost, or I feel, and then almost immediately in most cases, you'll take a breath and you'll feel. And you might feel, and someone might find themselves sobbing or laughing or crying, you know, or feeling very, very, you know, usually it's a sense of aloneness, loss, hopelessness, despair, sadness, etc. Because that's why, you know, because that's what we want to avoid feeling the most as human beings, not feeling enough, not feeling lovable, feeling separate, feeling alone. And so when you feel that, the paradox is, and I call this the paradox of change, the paradox is that as soon as you stop trying to fix and change and get somewhere else, and you just be with what is, everything changes in that moment. And so that is feeling your heart, feeling your body, feeling what's there. And sometimes to feel it, you have to acknowledge that you're not feeling it first, because that's at least the truth. I don't know what I'm feeling here. I have no idea. It feels like like just did this with the person the other day. He put his hand on his throat, and he had all this stuff that was happening there. And he had surgery. And I said, does it even feel like your throat? And he said, no, it feels like separate, like a, you know, like just knock on, you know, wood there or something. And I said, just acknowledge that. Just say right here, I feel separate or disconnected. And as he was holding his throat, he said that out loud. And then like 3 seconds later, he's this like, you know, leader of this huge company, and he's got everything together and he's holding everything, and he's just sobbing. And then a moment later, it's like his whole face changed. All the blood came back to his head. All the symptoms he was experiencing went away. And suddenly he's back in touch with himself. And now he's able to feel. And that's what you're asking. I think it's like, what does it mean even to like connect, you know, to that part of you? Like, what does it mean to connect to your heart? How do you do it? I mean, that sometimes is, you just put your hands there, take a breath there, and feel what you feel, and notice if you're not feeling, and acknowledge that. And then that paves the way for something to actually show up.
That's so powerful. Thank you for sharing that story. And I guess a personal question that I have is, have you helped people with tinnitus?
You know, I have, and it's an interesting one because it's a frequency. And there are different, you know, medical diagnoses why that might be happening. It could be a structural, mechanical, you know, thing that happened where someone tore their, you know, the membrane there in the eardrum, or they had damage physically, etc. It can be some like elusive neurological. Is this neurological? Like, what's going on? So there are different types, and there are different diagnoses. And so I've worked with a lot of people over the years with that. And some people, it's instantly changed within like one session. Other people, it's been a more elusive thing. But what I started to notice is that because it's a frequency that people hear and experience, if you can match that frequency, because think about mirror neurons and the mirroring back of information from your sensory system. If you can match that frequency that you're experiencing inside your ear or inside your head, and you can make that sound, not about making it out loud, to get it out, but to make it to resonate or match. And you could put your fingertip there, you could put your finger on your ear, or put it on the side of your head, or wherever you're feeling it. And you do your very best to make a frequency, tone, or sound that would exactly match that vibration in that region of your body. And you can exactly connect with it. And that sound might be super high pitched. It might be, you know, but whatever. And it's usually a weird sound that you would never make, because your brain, it's chaotic, really. There's a chaotic element to tinnitus and a lot of conditions where like the system needs to destabilize and go into some kind of chaotic kind of remodeling, and we're not allowing it to happen. We're trying to contain it and get rid of it. But just like putting your hands on your heart and breathing, and recognizing this is part of me. Sometimes we have to put our hand or our attention and our focus and maybe even touching that area to bring our attention to the fact that there's a part of us that's having a vibrational frequency that's an experience that's not able to dissipate. Are there potentially damaged nerves? Are there potentially many different things going on mechanically?
Too many loud
Absolutely.
rock concerts.
Yeah, exactly. Because could you have damage, et cetera? Yes. But even with all of that, we have to look at another side of things, because you have a strong correlation in the literature with low back pain and disc injuries, for example. So low back pain it's a stronger correlation between financial stress and job dissatisfaction in men and relational stress in women than actual damage to a disc or degeneration. You could have degeneration in the vertebra, you can have a disc bulge and all these things going on, and that person could be totally asymptomatic out playing golf, and you would look at their X-ray or MRI and think that person needs immediate, like they need surgery, and yet they have no symptoms. You could look at someone else with a totally normal X-ray, and that person could be in debilitating pain because there are other factors going on. Inflammation's happening, and then you have to look at, well, what is inflammation? What's it tied into? Oh, the emotional system and white blood cells and histamine responses and all these different things. We just have to expand our kind of view on what the body is and what these symptoms are really about and what they mean, because symptoms are saying, hey, pay attention, something needs to change here, you need to take some kind of action, or you need to bring a focus and attention to this area. And trying to fix the broken thing is an outdated model. It's more about connecting with the energy and the information there, and then providing a new source of awareness that could carry us in a different direction.
That's really interesting, because in my times I've really got into meditation over the last few years, and when I get to that point where like what you said around meeting and matching the same pitch, at that point I can change the volume consciously. I can bring it down, I can't turn it off just yet, but I can. And then every now and again I catch myself and I jump, and it'll be like, oh, it almost went, and but
so here's what I'll say, and this is applicable to everybody listening or watching, that as soon as you stop trying to have it go, do something to make this go away, and you let that energy, you seek to let that energy be discovered and felt and experienced, and allow it to take you on a journey, and you let it become the primary leading rhythm instead of you trying to be separate from it, everything changes. So because there's no it separate than you. That tinnitus isn't a separate thing than you. It's an experience that you're having as part of you, that's like a some kind of fractal fragment that's vibrating at a certain frequency, and you haven't fully invited it to express. It's like a board meeting is going on, and there's one person that's just like sitting there with all this information to share, and you're like, nope, you're not speaking. And so you want to invite them to actually share. Let it all out. We're not going to fire you. We're not going to get rid of you. We're not going to do anything. Oh, we want to hear everything. And then you're like, oh shit, maybe I didn't want to hear all of that, because, and that's why we keep it separate, because the information there was hard for us to digest in some way. So the body fragments that off into different kind of silos.
Yeah, I appreciate that. My final question for you, my friend, and thank you so much for this conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. And my final question is, what does the phrase "always better than yesterday" mean to you?
Well, I mean, interesting. There's some different, it's hitting me in some different ways, but I mean, always is to me the infinite. And the infinite, the source, the one, the timelessness. When we go there, it's always perfection. And so yesterday may be the pain, yesterday may be the illusion of like this happened to us, or maybe something did happen to us, but the suffering is in the attachment to kind of what happened. The liberation is in the always, is in the infinite nature of the universe. So and better is a very subjective thing, but I would say better is going to the source of life and the source of the universe, and That's always going to be better.
I love that. Love that. Great answer. I can see you processing that. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the great work that you do in the world. I'll share all your good links in the show notes. And I'd just be honored if you'd leave us a final thought from your good self.
You're more than enough, and you absolutely have all the resources within your reach or within you that you need. Do what you're going to do, that you're called to do, that you're inspired to do, and don't wait, because it is a short journey, and we've got a lot to do to contribute to this world. So make it happen. Go for it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.